5, 4, 3.
Thanks for joining us. This is Many Faces, One World. My name is Uchenna Ekwo. Welcome to the program. Many Faces, One World is a program that extols the common bond of humanity, extolling those virtues that bind us, that unite us, and de-emphasizing those issues that divide us. In this edition of the program, we'll be looking at the concept of civilization, how it affects you, how it affects every one of us, and indeed how it really transforms itself into the present-day world where we live in. As you may have known, there are different dimensions of civilization, from the early times to modern times, and what it means to you and what it means to every one of us. You've also heard about concepts like clash of civilization, the way different civilizations are fighting each other and bringing a whole lot of intolerance and problems within the world we live in. But we believe that human beings can always overcome these challenges. And for us to look at this issue as it affects us in terms of civilization, in terms of migration, in terms of technology, and a whole gamut that perhaps revolve around civilization. And we'll be looking at different definitions, different concepts, as we found in the literature of civilization. And to discuss this important topic today is our two gentlemen from different backgrounds, actually. From my immediate right is Francisco Bozano Benz. Actually, he flew all the way from Spain and got into New York yesterday just to participate in this program. Bozana, you're welcome to this program.
Thank you.
Next to him is Ernest Opong. Ernest Opong is actually a journalist and the editor-in-chief of Amandla newspapers. And I'm sure you'll enjoy his perspectives, very rounded perspectives on issues about international development and political economy of Africa. Ernest, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
That's the outlook. And like I said earlier, civilization means so many things to many people in terms of technology, in terms of transition, generational change, and all that. And even religion, race relations, and all that. So you discover that it affects us in different dimensions. As a matter of fact, historian Neil Ferguson, in his latest book, Civilization, the West and the Rest, actually captured the essence of civilization and looked at it from the prism of power relations and how perhaps the West and other parts of the world are relating, you know, either in good terms or in bad terms and all that. And there are a whole lot of other experts in this area that have really dealt on this issue about civilization. The core of this program is actually to look at these things in a holistic way and narrow them down on how we can really utilize some of these problems here and there to see how we can forge a common society, a common world that will be minimizing conflict and that will reduce tension around the globe and how we relate to one another. So, gentlemen, I'll actually start effectively by asking Ernest, perhaps, what do you understand by civilization and how does it affect the present-day society, considering the evolution of man and where we are today?
Well, it's very easy to misconstrue or construe the meaning of civilization from the perspective of modernization or even a well-cultured perspective. But I will start this with a story, though. It's a very funny story that happened in London, in the Hyde Park of London, which is just like Central Park here, where you have people mounting podiums to speak about anything at all. You can talk about politics, you can talk about economics, so something, and of course you have people also standing there to listen. And there was one time, it is believed that one time there was this young Nigerian speaker who had mounted the podium and was talking against British imperialism. And so there was this British gentleman who was passing, and hearing what this guy was saying was kind of annoyed, listening to this black man condemning his country for being imperialistic. So what he said, what the guy asked him was, that is, the white man asked the black man on the podium, says, "Hey, I hear that in your country, where you come from, you people live on trees." And the guy said, "Oh yes, yes, we live on trees. We live on trees, all right. But let me tell you, we go up to our trees with a much, much more refined and better technology than your elevators and your lifts." And the white guy was very livid, you know. And it was so he left quite, obviously he was embarrassed. But what I'm saying here, this story is a very apt implication about what civilization is all about. It's very easy to misconstrue the civilization. Civilization is more than that. I've always maintained that, and of course I agree with so many writers and observers about the history of civilization, to the point that civilization is not just a matter of being civilized or being well cultured or being well behaved. Civilization is one, behavioral because, but it's on a larger perspective. Behavioral on a larger perspective. But behaviors are affected by other things too. Things like technology, things like militancy, which makes people a bit more powerful to do things they do. And things like culture, which people perceive to be more superior to other cultures. And therefore, something exportable to other places, you know, supported or backed up by militancy and technology.
Let me stop you there.
Right.
When you mentioned civilization from the perspective of culture,
right,
it brings to mind that, in fact, the whole idea of civilization actually entered into the lexicon around the 18th century. And this is described perhaps as the act or process of bringing someone out from a primitive stage or, you know, uneducated state to the other, a kind of transition from old environment to the whole understanding
of
more
modernized environment.
So let me go to Francisco Bazano-Benz as an international development expert. How will you view civilization in the context of cultural mix, where the whole world perhaps seems to be almost like one village, you know, like Marshall McLuhan would say? You know, how will you perceive civilization, you know, from your experience as an international development expert?
This is an excellent question. I think what we have to overcome is this Eurocentric modernist paradigm in which we totally identify civilization with the growth of civitas, which means cities, and meaning mostly metropoles, meaning mostly European capitals of empires. And I think that we have to start understanding civilization as espousing the diversity of the world. Because today, in order to arrive at a sustainable path, which is a need that the planet is demanding from humanity at large, we need to incorporate also the indigenous knowledge, the experience of indigenous people of surviving in very diverse habitats. Because the problem with civilization based on reason, based on Eurocentrism and based on modernism is that it's a blanket imposition of one discourse. And what we need is a conversation. What we need is to cooperate. What we need is to learn from one another. What we need is to use a broader reason, which is a Socratic reason, if you want, although he was a European, in the sense that our knowledge development has to be based on dialogue and not on monologue. And this diversity will allow us to understand much better about the landscapes that we are living in, and in order for us to develop them in ways that respect nature and the social ecology of each habitat.
I'm interested in the concept of Eurocentrism. You just mentioned something like Eurocentrism. And I also know that in conversations regarding civilization, there's also what perhaps is also viewed as American centrism, if you like, Americanism in the whole dialogue about civilization. For example, going by the story he just told us about someone who told an African that if you live on the tree, in the tree or something like that. So is there a way we can really bring this analysis into a perspective where we ask the question, who is that person who defines civilization? Who tells someone that you're primitive? Who tells the other person that you are more modern? So who, perhaps, there's some kind of arrogation of, arrogance of some people. I don't know whether that's what he meant by Eurocentrism, and perhaps the story he told about maybe an African young man or something like that. So how would we put it in perspective in terms of who actually defines what is civilization, Ernest?
Well, that's the question. You see, and one thing that we have to bear in mind, don't forget, the term civilization became a lexicon in the 18th century. And don't forget, the 18th century happens to be what do they call it? The
Industrial Revolution.
The time of the Enlightenment.
Okay, yeah. So
Enlightenment before the Industrial Revolution. But who coined these terms? The question is, who coined these terms? Don't forget, too, that that was the period when colonization began. Even though the initial intention of European colonization of places like Africa and Asia was not to establish suzerainty or sovereignty over these places, but rather for economic gain. However, with the industrialization and the need for raw materials, if you can put it that way, and other things that could sustain industrialization, there appeared to be the need to exert control in these places. And together, what happens was the establishment of religious or cultural imposition on these various places. So you find wherever the Europeans went, or wherever the colonialists went, they went with the Christian religion, even though these Africans or these Asians already had their religions, okay? But there was this imposition of these various religious and cultural practices, and the condemnation of the original indigenous native practices, which kind of coerced these indigenous people, these native people, to accept whatever was being imposed on them from the outside. And therefore, it was it kind of behoved on these imperialists and these colonialists to begin looking at themselves as superior. And again, if we look at the civilization, if we try to define civilization as bringing out the primitive into the modern, okay, as defined by those who think that civilization is supposed to mean, it meant, well, if we can do this, if we can impose our authority, political authority, and even religion and cultures on these people, then of course we are superior, right?
Okay, I found a comment, or rather an article that's written by one guy from Singapore. It's titled "The Dangers of Decadence: What the West Can Teach the West." And what I found interesting in that document is that much as this author railed at this concept of civilization emanating from the West, or the West teaching the rest, but now he's talking about what the rest of the world can teach the West. And he considered to the fact that the hallmarks of civilization can be found in the West. How do you explain that? Because the truth about the matter is, our definition of the civilization, the modern things, the things that make life good, science, technology, the internet and all that are found predominantly in the West. So does that suggest that really the West should, set the pace?
There's no straightforward answer, really. The hegemony for the Western point of view has to do with its imperial power over the rest of the world. The first world empire was the Spanish Empire, and then you had a series of other Euro-centered empires. Although you mentioned before the United States is a non-European power, it's still part of the Eurocentric mode, because we're not talking about Turtle Island. The indigenous voice of the Americas of the United States was supplanted very much by the colonizers and conquerors of European origin. And the relationship of knowledge development between the Ivy League universities, it forms very much a common origin. But I think that this is the reason, really, why we ignore other civilizations, such as the Chinese or African civilizations, Egyptian as one case, or the Incaic civilizations or the Maya civilizations, etc. Because they were all great civilizations. There are many records of Europeans going to Africa or going to Latin America and admiring what they were seeing and destroying. So this is the history that explains this monologue. But on the other hand, given the fact that there has been an enormous concentration of wealth and power, and around the Mediterranean region since very early history, it's partially to do with the fact that there were a series of very beneficial environmental factors that made it easy for people to survive and gave more time for thought. Which probably, and we know for sure, has happened in other parts. So this is not going away from the argument of the fact that there was a power relation in terms of the Eurocentric hegemony. But there were points in the Mediterranean of great exchange between Africa, Asia, through the Silk Road, and Europe. And there was great knowledge generated, and the very privileges of wealth that have been concentrated in the metropolis means that great advances in knowledge have been generated within these centers. So one should not throw the baby with the bathwater.
As a matter of fact, part of the whole concept of this program revolves around exploring diaspora strategies, evolution, and engagement. And you have also mentioned something about the Western standards and stuff like that. Ernest, you are from an African background, right? Actually from African descent. And you must have heard that the story that civilization started in Egypt. So how, in the context of this discussion, maybe will you situate the present-day Africa in terms of the fact that civilization was supposed to have started over there, and today they are now the barbaric, well, they are now perhaps not as civilized as who define civilization today?
Okay, thanks for this very enlightening question. Well, of course, Africa is the cradle of civilization. After all, Lucy was found in Africa, and she is supposed to be the mother of all people, black, white, yellow, whatever. But when it comes to civilization, which we also define as having certain elements of technology and culture and other things in it, we look at Africa as a cradle because the very basis of mankind's existence in the world, which is farming or agriculture, which must have started way back in the Sumeria in present-day Iraq, was not supported by any means of transporting the products from the farm to the village or to the towns without the wheel. In fact, it is Africans who transported, who invented the wheel because they invented or they discovered metallurgy, iron, in Kush in Meroe. But as I was discussing...
Where is Kush?
Kush happens to be somewhere in the present-day southern Sudan. And it was where metal was first discovered, and the wheel was first discovered. They put the wheel to the horse or to the as in the animal, so that they could transport themselves and goods and services from one place to the other. But that notwithstanding, as I was telling Paco the other time, he who discovers what does not necessarily hold on to what. You do not. The fact that you discovered fire doesn't necessarily mean that you will be able to build on to your discovery and to become more powerful or become somebody much more specialized in the use of fire. The Chinese discovered the gunpowder, but they did not use it as much as the Europeans who went and discovered the gunpowder in China used it later on. So yes, Africa must have been the cradle of civilization, but along the line, probably, and that's, historians have so many theories about that, probably along the line they became lazy or they became complacent, and they thought, well, why don't we share or something? I mean, probably for some reason they gave up and somebody took it over.
Look at that. Let's also situate this conversation within the cultural mix of the various regions of the world. And I would also like to remind our viewers that this is Many Faces, One World, a production of Center for Media and Peace Initiative. You can also join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. And before I go to Francisco Bozan, the whole concept of civilization from a cultural perspective, I am also reminded by a sermon preached by Martin Luther King in 1965, actually February 26, 1965, where he said, and I quote, that we have allowed our civilizations to outrun our culture. And for this reason, we have many problems today. So what are the problems you see the humanity having today because of all these various interpretations or treatment of civilization? Francisco.
What are the problems I see today because of this? Sorry. Going back first to the Sumeric, Mesopotamic, Egyptian culture, in order to answer this from the roots. One other thing that characterized this situation, or a key thing, was the ability to accumulate cereals in silos. Because this allowed for a concentration and accumulation of wealth. And it allowed for the birth of social hierarchies that could not have been established before through the appropriation of this accumulated wealth, which was socially produced, and where nature, always generous, was a key actor that was always forgotten. And you get the birth of a class of priests and the birth of the new cities, such as Babylon, which is a biblical metaphor. At the same time that you have this model emerging in this very moment in which civilization is born, civilization being civitas, and therefore cities, you have later on the development of violence, a means of violence, and the concentration of violence to the ability to control wealth. Therefore, you could actually develop your own armies, and you could develop your own weaponry, and you get the beginning of what led later on to the Cold War, which is the race to who has the better weapons. So the fact that you have iron and metallurgy also allowed you to have better weapons than those were in the Bronze Age. So this is an important thing. So one of the problems that we have today is violence. and the deconstruction of violence and the distribution of this wealth in order to save the growth of democratic processes that will allow for the development of a world society where dialogue and mutual understanding can resolve major conflicts which are both social and international in nature. And therefore, we need to deconstruct this concentration into centers of power, and we need to move towards convergence.
As a matter of fact, what you have just said is similar to what Samuel Huntington said in his provocative essay entitled The Clash of Civilizations. You know, he noted in that essay that power is shifting among civilizations. And I guess this shift in power, be it viewed from the nationalistic perspective, maybe between nations or between generations and so on, or even between gender and stuff like that. So all these things kind of foster maybe what we talked about, violence. But in the context of clash of civilizations, especially like we have noted between perhaps the West and perhaps the whole idea of Islamophobic tendencies within the West and all that. So how will you relate these things in terms of how we can have a smoother and more harmonious relationship between and among nations, Ernest?
Well, this question is about the same as asking about the civilization, or the same as Martin Luther King's quote that you just gave. Because it looks like we have allowed civilization to actually influence our cultures. But what kind of civilization is he talking about here? And why is he saying this? And in the context of this clash, this cultural clashes or civilization clashes, what do we find among the various peoples of the world, and what has engendered so far? I'm looking at these clashes and the reasons for the clashes from so many perspectives. We haven't mentioned economics as a very important factor of civilization, a very important element of civilization. Somebody was saying on PBS the other time, was it last night, that wherever there has been some Western intervention in the world, there's always oil. There is oil in Iraq, and that's why the United States and the allies went there. There is oil in Libya, where that's why the allies went there. But they went to Afghanistan because of the 9/11, 2001. But I'm asking, is it truly the fact that it is oil or it is economics that drive the powers, or that drive these clashes? Recent events, particularly post-9/11 world, has seen a much more involved clashes, or involved would I say, I don't know the kind word, involved, a much more involved altercations. That's the right word, altercation between peoples, between belief systems, and between the various powers of the world. We are thinking that this is the end of the world, of the Cold War. But what we are seeing today is not so much as the end of the Cold War, but it's much more of a different type of war, economic war. We're looking at China, which has suddenly emerged as a major economic power. And we're also looking at Europe, which is suddenly drifting down, even though it was a major economic power. The United States is tottering. And so what is happening here is that if you have taken the lead, it's a race. We've all taken the lead. You took the lead up till now, and then all of a sudden you find yourself lagging behind. You find yourself being drawn behind by certain factors unknown to you, or probably manufactured by you. You see. So what we are seeing here is that we do not want
especially if I'm the power, I do not want somebody who a few months ago, a few years ago, I was giving aid to. Somebody who wasn't so much in my cycle of respected people, or somebody who I didn't expect to be in the situation they find themselves in. And so what we are afraid, there is that fear of this cultural explosion coming from the unexpected places.
Do you mean cultural explosion from the perspective of some people viewing certain cultures as inferior or superior?
Exactly. Because, you see, over the period of time, we have had a certain amount of Americanism or Western culture virtually clouding the world.
Okay, let's look at this actually. I want to also situate this around migration, or if you like, immigration.
Okay.
The fact that some people or some individuals would like to leave their own country to another country, does that suggest that they are running towards a more civilized environment, or they want to live an uncivilized environment and all that? What is driving some of these issues in terms of what we are discussing today? Because you just mentioned economic factors.
Right.
That's why I want to look at that. So can you discuss it in the context of the issues surrounding immigration policies, modern migration and all that around the world?
I will, because see, definitely you have, the migration is moving from the poor to the rich, from the south to the north. It's a north-south migration. It used to be a north-south migration for economic gains, but and to impose ideas and civilizations on others. Now it's a south-north migration for economic gains and economic freedom. At least that's the perception. That is why young Africans walk through the desert, Sahara Desert, to go to Europe. They face all the odds. They are ready to face all the odds to cross the desert to go to Europe, because that's where they find economic sustenance. But largely because of factors at home. Because in as much as we think we lived in a world that is seeing a lot of progress and other things, so many of these developing countries are even getting poorer, and therefore are not able to sustain their populations, or to sustain these populations by way of employment and other things. You see? And so some of these young people are giving up and thinking that they can find their sustenance or they can find their economic freedom elsewhere. So that is very, very obvious. Okay,
still on economics, Francis Bazzano, let's also look at the current crisis that exists in the world, economic crisis. I actually surprised, for example, like Greece, Spain, and most advanced democracies, and in fact Asian cities, especially Greece in the first instance, that were supposed to have invented democracy, quote and unquote, So, and they're having these economic problems. In the context of our conversation today about civilization and all that, and people are coming to rescue them and stuff like that, and even Spain particularly. So how will you situate this in terms of, is there anything to learn from this environment, this kind of situation, or is there something not to learn in terms of civilizing one sector, or kind of transition from one economic order to another?
Well, I think we've jumped to a new reality, which is not so much to do with the crisis of a certain geopolitical hierarchy that controlled resources until let's say, the beginning of this millennium. I think what we have now is a crisis which is planetary in nature. And the attempt to explain this crisis in terms of what's going on in each individual nation is short-sighted. That's why today we really need dialogue. And it is in everybody's interest to exchange. Because the only way out of this crisis is through convergence. We can't create wealth by concentrating it further. Precisely the concentration of wealth into the financial sector through speculation is the cause of the crisis. As I said before, coming out of this crisis is through distribution of wealth. And in order to distribute that according to our potentials of each nation and each individual, we need to talk.
You mean the entire humanity needs to talk, or
yes,
the entire different countries?
And we have the internet, and we have the tools. We have these tools right here.
No, but when you talk about dialogue, it's of interest to me actually in terms of how different civilizations try to understand themselves, because it's also at the heart of what really bothers me about when we talk about clash of civilization. The whole concept of the whole idea about crisis between maybe, or the hatred, or let me not use the word hatred, but the perception that perhaps most Islamic countries are violent and kind of labeling everybody together. I believe that there must be some good ones amongst them and so on and so forth. So does that not worry you in terms of how we have been able to have an honest conversation in terms of understanding the peculiar nature of certain religions, certain cultures, and all that?
Well, I think that the whole notion of crisis of civilization and the clash of civilizations, specifically, is partially based on objective truths, but then it has been used in a very demagogic way in order to hide the interest of groups that are hegemonic. And, you know, we are the 99%. We're talking about 1%. This is a planetary phenomenon. It's, in economic terms, you have a 1% that controls enormous power and control of resources and wealth. So this is the key problem. But certainly, since civilization is born through a hierarchy, hierarchies, in order to establish themselves, they need a certain amount of stigma and scapegoating. So as madness and civilization, madness being the other, which can be used more broadly, of Michel Foucault, you see, mental illness and unreason attracted that stigma to themselves, but even this was neither complete, simple, nor immediate. The stigmatization is just a way of blaming others. So Islamophobia, it's what it is. It's just a way of blaming others. With the crisis of communism and the Cold War collapsed, Islamophobia has played the role of what communism was in the West.
Okay, so Enes, from as a journalist, how will you assess the role of the media in either inflaming tension, or perhaps in reducing some misunderstanding between different religions, different cultures, and so on, particularly like Bozana mentioned, Islamophobia. So how will you look at the media in terms of how they have really helped to fan some of these embers of discord within the human race?
Well, the media it's been very selfish throughout the world in its dissemination of information, or in its manner of dealing with these issues. And of course, the media is also informed by several factors of ideology, and factors of economics, especially in the West and other places, which are capitalistic in nature. Now, these have actually described the media's approach to issues around the world. And again, with the rising tensions and the lack of trust among the various civilizations, if you may, or the various powers, and the the incidence of new ideas emanating from religions, particularly Islamophobia, and that kind of stuff, a whole lot of things. And again, 9/11 which is a very, very important episode in the history of the world, the media has not been quite fair, you see, because everybody expected the media to be objective. Objectivity has been thrown to the air.
Well, they always argue that there is nothing like objectivity, perhaps, in reporting and all that.
There hasn't, and like I said, it depends on where you stand. So if I'm reporting an issue, I'm reporting from my own perspective, even though objectively I'm supposed to be descriptive and definitive, descriptive and objective, you know. But unfortunately, we haven't had that kind of world.
Okay, let's shift this conversation, actually, return to the focus of this program, which is civilization. There is another dimension of civilization that, we have also mentioned at the beginning of this program, emphasizing technological issues, technology. Like you mentioned something about the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and all that. These were civilizations, that existed in the past, and today we are talking about the internet. And putting that in context, you also look at a situation where there is a civilization from the angle of generational shift. Because today, young people, for example, are obsessed with the internet, the Facebook and so on, and social media and all that. So one professor told me how he sees his kids only exchange, instead of talking to themselves, they're in the same room, but they'll just be texting each other, and he finds it very odd as someone who belongs to an older generation. So these are civilizations in their own. In other words, civilization, movements in time, shifts, both generational and also time-wise. So looking at that, holistically, how would you look at, the generational change in terms of how we view civilization and all that? Francisco?
I think we're moving towards a more participatory democracy in which we can overcome the hierarchical nature of civilization and move towards progress which is human progress and not progress of a part of humanity. I think that technology is enabling this, but I don't think it's only just a question of means of communication and technology. I think the main origin of this new industrial revolution, which is a socio-technical and scientific revolution that we're going through today because of the great advancement of knowledge, which is a conquest of humanity. As you said, we're all inventing. Some appropriate this. And I would like to promote this crucial book of '68 by Radovan Richter, in a moment in which there's a lot of great thinking in Czechoslovakia of the time, which is called The Civilization at the Crossroads, La Civilización en la Encrucijada in Spanish. And it gives a series of different networks of different revolutionary changes that are actually objectively happening today. And going to the social, we are in the point in which, to which we will go back later, but that in essence is justified because the new scientific productive machinery has overcome in reality the financial system that gave birth to it. So the objective of just profit of great corporations is trivial in comparison with the real benefits measured in human welfare that could rain upon us if we allowed that these new methods could be used freely and could be developed at a growing rhythm.
Are you referring to changes in communication as we understand it today, or I mean related to civilization, or maybe the shift in generations? For example, what existed in the 60s probably may be obsolete today. So those transitions, is that what you're referring to?
I think it's both generational. Because, of course, each generation reflects more than anybody else the potential of each time. But the main thing is that we have a new potential today. And what I'm saying is that it's not just a new communications potential, it's a new knowledge potential. because it is not sufficient to say that we're moving towards an information society. I think it's better to talk about moving towards a knowledge society, in which knowledge will become a very important force in the productive process.
I like that concept, knowledge.
May I come in here?
Go ahead.
Everything Paco has said is excellent, and I would like to add this, and would rather refer to Marshall McLuhan talking about the global village as developing a very, very predictive statement, which is now happening. And if you read, we were talking about Alvin Toffler today, who was also the person who predicted the use of computers and robots in the workplaces. Now, what we are seeing here today, the use of technology and of course the participation of the youths, has made so many things possible which were not possible, which in fact is a vindication of Einstein's theory of relativity, that everything is relative.
It's good.
That everything, what we are seeing here is, we're seeing this glass today. The next time we know, we can develop something that can move the glass without necessarily touching it. And so everything is possible now. And these are some of the things that have defined technology now, civilization. But at the same time, let's look at it this way. Whose civilization are we looking at? Whose technology has actually moved or is moving what is going on now? You see? But we cannot ascribe these things, what is happening now, to any particular or any specific civilization, to any specific culture, because it's participatory. It is democratic. And the most important part of it is that it is global.
I like the point Francisco mentioned about knowledge society. And I also want to look at the issue of ideas ruling the world. Before we came on set, we talked about America, for example, being an idea, an idea, freedom. There's an idea about tolerance. There's an idea of creativity, all right? So, and given that scenario, would it be right, for example, to even see, I'm just curious about this issue of class of civilization. Some people say, we're fighting, America because of X, Y, Z. But there is really no one who is, America is an idea. The day the bomb, the 9/11 incident, all the people there, they are from different regions of the world. So it's like everyone is in America. So it's like America is more like the world, so to speak. So if you say you're fighting America, you're more like fighting the world. Does that make sense in the context of civilization we're discussing?
Well, yes. The idea of America is the philosophy that underlines the foundations of this nation. It is that philosophy that opened up this country to almost every person in the world, to the extent that 9/11 was not seen as an attack on America, but was seen as an attack on the idea of America. And when I talk about the idea of America, I talk about the idea of democracy. That is the basic philosophy, which Tocqueville, what's his name?
Alex de Tocqueville.
Alex de Tocqueville, as well as people like generals from France and people like Pulaski from Poland all came here to die for, to fight for. So that is the idea I'm talking about. This country is an idea. America is idealistic in so many ways. It's the only country in the world where you can find, you can see a lot of things happening, where even an illegal alien has rights. You see, it's an ideal. And so that ideal of America was attacked, that ideal which is universal. The issue of democracy, the issue of freedom, the issue of independence of thought, the issue of freedom of speech, these are central issues to human existence. And that is what we see around the world. That is why in Burma there has always been an attack on dictatorship and tyranny. And that is why there was this attack on the tyranny of Gaddafi. And that is why we see the Arab Spring now. So, yes, America is an idea, and that is an idea that everybody aspires to.
Okay, having said that, you know, it's a basic idea, like he said, that revolves around democracy, basic freedoms and all that. And perhaps such an idea perhaps is what is also pushing changes in Middle East and North Africa. And that's also another form of civilization of their own, because they're changing from what dictatorial tendencies to a more liberal, a more democratic state. You know, Francisco, how would you look at these trends perhaps that are happening, you know, in the Middle East and North Africa as informing our conversation, you know, regarding civilization and how humanity have changed from one state to another state? And do you think the state also is ideal or is better for them?
The state as a social organization, you mean?
As the state in terms of liberalization, opening up the society, and horizontal communication occurring in terms of sharing of ideas and removal of you know, intolerance and stuff like that.
Well, I think it all comes into the knowledge society, and there is the idea side, which is the aspirations of humans being the most intelligent animals that we know, wanting to access knowledge. Therefore, they need freedom and democracy, but they also need equality of terms so that all the ideas can play similarly, and they also need solidarity so that we can do something together to change things and transform it into something real. But I think that the United States as a paradigm is not only a great representation of human ideals, but it's also a representation of pragmatism in terms of what can actually be done. And I think in this sense, the ability of development of technologies of communication and the abilities of developing of new instruments of knowledge is going to be crucial, and that what we're going to move on to a completely different relationship between the individual and society, in which individuals are going to manage to participate much more, because knowledge and the exchange of information and scientific knowledge is going to be more and more the basis, because we cannot have a society based on petroleum, on raw materials, on metals, etc., because the planet is limited. Therefore, we have to find a way of doing things better, means we have to know more.
Let's also move this conversation towards another corner. Let's look at it from geography, for example. You must have had issues like Chinese civilization, you know, European civilization, Spanish civilization, maybe American civilization, and all that. There are many epochs in history, you know, regarding civilization. So, will you address civilization from that geographical prism for us to understand perhaps what these things mean, you know, differently? Like, what, you know, Chinese civilization, what do you understand by American civilization, and so on? Ernest?
When you talk about from these perspectives of civilization, as we've seen, probably I'm looking at it from this. All of these are kind of culminating into one thing: the various the civilizations. And Paco mentioned something that everything is now participatory. Things are coming to a head. Things are coming to a point where and that is my personal perspective, that we are looking at, we are seeing a development towards maybe a unitary or one world civilization, global village. That is what I'm seeing now. Okay. And that is because of one thing and one thing only: the internet. It has become a powerful tool of actually not only making nonsense of certain isms, the pride of ethnicity or the pride of belonging to a particular group or that group, or that. But it is also opening eyes, it's also opening ways, making inroads into other civilizations and telling the world that, look, we are all the same and that we can do this. But it all depends on how we use this mechanism.
Yeah, I like your summation really about one world. You know, one world, one civilization. Yes. And I think it's culminating into, events really are culminating into that. And the internet, like you rightly said, it has become really the platform, you know, the global public square, as you know, you may want to say it, you know, where a meeting point of every humanity, where different languages, you know, we share ideas and all that. Francisco, in a minute or in 30 seconds, can you just also mention something about, you know, civilization from geographical dimension and all that, you know, in terms of Chinese civilization and some popular civilization in the past?
Well, geography plays a role from the point of view of trade routes, because the development of trade and the exchange of knowledge is important. So you have the Silk Road, which it was both through land and also through the sea. So that's a geographic phenomenon. But then you have habitats that before we had a very intensive petrochemical energy or non-human or animal energy were very crucial in terms of creating conditions where people would have enough time to do things beyond survival. So there are two things that I think habitat has an influence. Routes of transportation and exchange, with today the internet makes it the geography less important, and habitats where people would have enough energy in order to develop their culture into greater level, which is also losing weight because of the ability of using non-human and animal energy. So what we're going towards is convergence.
Thank you very much. I must thank our guests today to really appreciate your coming to this program. Francisco Brazana, an international development expert and the director of tenure and ecology here in New York, and of course Ernest Opong, the editor-in-chief of Farmland newspapers. And my name is Uchenna Ekwo. Please do join us next week as we assemble another intelligence panel to discuss issues that affect our lives, and most importantly, as they also help us to come together as one world, one humanity. And that note, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and we do hope to get into your living rooms and your offices next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is good.